Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be considering some quick-fire quotes on the theme of manipulation in Macbeth. Manipulation is the managing or influencing of another person or an issue for your own personal gain. Now, Macbeth is seen as both manipulated and also manipulative within this play. He's manipulated and buys into the witches' prophecies because he seeks their wisdom, and his actions are in part due to how he's being manipulated or how he interprets information. When he first meets the witches in Act 1, Scene 3 and revisits them in Act 4, we learn of his desire to be manipulated by their views and in fact his almost addiction for what they have to tell him. Now equally, his marriage to Lady Macbeth is punctuated by her quite dysfunctional and abusive relationship pattern. She, in Act 1, Scene 5, before we even see them interacting, shares her shameless sense of how she seeks to manipulate her husband when she reads the letter of his promotion. As we learn in Act 1 later, in Act 1, Scene 7, she will prey on her husband's masculinity as a way to bid for him to be manipulated to do what she wants, and in this case it's the killing of Duncan. Ultimately though, as Macbeth begins his decline across our play, as our tragic hero, his mind is manipulated by the words and prophecies of others, and he manipulates himself into a position where his judgment ultimately falters, and he becomes a ludicrous farce of a king who has a very embarrassing death. So contextually, perhaps Shakespeare seeks to emphasise that part of Macbeth's fatal flaw is not just ambition, but his inability to follow God's plan for his life. Instead, by listening to the voices of others aside from God, he's defying the divine right of kings and therefore proving that he is not the rightful king of Scotland. So let's launch straight in. The opening quote, "Fair is foul and foul is fair," is stated by the witches in Act 1, Scene 1. It shows the subversion of nature in their hands. They are manipulating the natural world, where what is good is becoming bad and what is bad can seem good. So the audience is immediately aware that natural order has been disturbed, and we learn we shouldn't be trusting them at all. Perhaps here Shakespeare is presenting the witches as the kind of chief co-conspirators of our play, and also characters who are no doubt centre stage, stirring a cauldron, presenting a united front, and their movement would no doubt echo that manipulative power they have. Something almost supernatural in their being is scary for us. So it's interesting that there's a mirroring of language in Act 1, Scene 3, when we see Macbeth enter the stage with Banquo. He says, "So fair and foul a day I have not seen," mirroring the language that the witches used earlier. It's almost as if he has already been manipulated by them before he's really interacted with them. This is his first line, and it already presents him as rather naive. As an audience, we see the power of the witches and their rhetoric already. It's an instant link. But Shakespeare uses the juxtaposition of the foul and fair to illustrate the inevitable downfall of this character. So his flaws are clearly going to mask his goodness. With that fair and foul in operation, we know this is about his decline. So next up we have this quote from Act 1, Scene 5. This is Lady Macbeth reading the letter, sharing with the audience her concerns about her husband when she says, "I do fear thy nature, it is too full of the milk of human kindness." The impression that we get when she uses the expression "full of the milk" suggests that his kindness is a sort of negative trait in her eyes that needs to be developed and worked on, that needs manipulation. When she says she fears thy nature, she's referring to her anxieties about his ability to meet the witch's prophecy truly. She's worried about it. She's already hinting at her dominance in their marriage and has a dangerous view of what human kindness clearly is. Now, Jacobean audiences would have been struck by her power in the marriage, but disgusted by her attitude and tone about her husband. We wonder, though, does Shakespeare allow us to see the manipulative streak of Lady Macbeth, just so that as the play unfolds, we learn the consequences of it not just for him, but for her. She's so at the heart of manipulation, and by Act 5, she's crying out, "Damn spot, out I say." She pays a price for the power of her manipulation. Also found within Act 1, Scene 5 is look like the innocent flower but be the serpent underneath it. Here Lady Macbeth is plotting what she seeks for her husband to be. When she uses the imperative look, she's highlighting her power to instruct her husband, even though she's not talking to him. This is both countercultural to the Jacobean audience, that you would dare to speak like this about your husband. But the simile that she uses of looking like the innocent flower is referring to the way that purity can act as a mask in your deception. Equally, the adjective innocent to describe that natural flower amplifies how, to her anyway, manipulating others into believing that you are virtuous or that Macbeth is virtuous is actually crucial. It's important also to consider that the image of the serpent is laden with biblical connotations that are negative. You know, the serpent is the creature that manipulates Eve into eating the forbidden fruit, after all. So if Macbeth is to actually be a villainous serpent, yet look like an innocent flower, he is in many ways mimicking the behaviours of evil or Satan. Perhaps Shakespeare creates such an aggressive wife for Macbeth to heighten his fickle rationale for murder by essentially trying to keep her happy, if that's our interpretation. But is it as simple as Lady Macbeth asserting her power over him? Or is it actually about him seeking selfish ambition and just listening too hard to manipulative voices around him? So each of these three quotes is an emotional, blackmailing tool of Lady Macbeth. Now the first two are from Act 1, Scene 7. Let's kick off with the first. When you durst do it, then you were a man. She's belittling Macbeth here, implying that his masculinity is proved when he kills Duncan. She goes on to say, you'd be so much more the man when he does kill, assuming once more he needs to prove himself to her, which is an incredibly threatening attitude to even display today. Screw your courage to the sticking place has an equally brutal tone to it. She's equally dismissive of her husband. The aggressive imperative verb screw heightens how ferociously she expects him to meet her demands. It seems purely manipulative, and the fact that she talks about courage, that abstract noun, is being coupled with a sense that it's her right to demand that he just shows courage. It's interesting to note that there isn't a change. In Act 2, Scene 2, this next quote emerges. And actually it's important for us to realise he has killed Duncan, and Lady Macbeth is still not happy with the way he is behaving. She manipulates him now by preying on her husband's whole mindset about what he's done. She uses the metaphor of the eye of childhood, suggesting that Macbeth is fearful like a young child or infant. The verb fears heightens her assertion that his anxieties are petty and pathetic, and additionally, a painted devil is an imaginary evil. This rhetoric is both persuasive and damning of masculinity and Macbeth. Even though he's killed, it's still not enough. She's ashamed that he can't handle the act of what he's done, and so as a consequence, she must manipulate him to put him in his place. This quote comes from the witches in Act 4, Scene 1. They manipulate Macbeth when he revisits, and they have a forceful prophecy. Macbeth, 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 beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. Dismiss me, enough. The repetition of the imperative verb of concern, beware, undeniably reinforces their power and also heightens the insecurities and concerns that Macbeth must have to even visit them. I suppose we've got the question of what if Macbeth is already power hungry? You know, we've seen him as this brave soldier at the start. Why does Shakespeare present so much manipulation being worked on him? The rhyme scheme of the witches here is unavoidable. It's there with Macduff and enough to heighten the sense that they have so much sway and say over Macbeth. But manipulation is at the heart of this play. And no matter how you perceive Macbeth, Shakespeare is emphasising the choice that we as humanity have to honour our principles or fall upon false wisdom, which leads us in a lot of mischief and trouble, as Macbeth sees by the actions of following the witches. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?